here. So as COVID-19 is still dominating headlines around the world, there is another emergency threatening the lives of millions of people, and that is food security. According to figures, over 265 million people could be on the brink of starvation. That's almost double the current rate. And this brings me to a well-known fact that there is, and there has always been, a connection between food and order. If we assume then that food insecurity creates political instability, which in turn leads to an array of security threats, then how are we responding to this challenge, and do we have something to fear? Mr. Luca Russo, Senior Food Crisis Analyst and Strategic Advisor at the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is a specialized agency of the United Nations dealing with agriculture and food, will today talk to Tactics about this new emergency and possible future security threats. Mr. Russo, good evening, and thank you for joining Tactics.
Thank you to you.
Could you firstly explain to those who are not familiar with the subject, what is food security and what leads to food insecurity?
Okay, this is the classical question that everyone asks, because, and this even my son and my wife ask always, okay, explain to me what, because you are getting your salary out of this. So the most simple definition is simply saying people that don't have enough food to sustain their life regularly. So, but there, and then I will come to the number. Normally, when we talk of food security, we have two big numbers. One is what we call the chronic food insecurity, which is people that all the year round, because they are poor, they don't have an income that allow them to access to enough food for a healthy life. And this is really very much linked to poverty. And the numbers which are published every year, they say about 820 million. Then there is another category of food insecurity, which is the most extreme, what we call acute hunger or acute food insecurity. These are the people that are in the conditions that are so extreme that their life is at risk. They can die of starvation because of lack of food. But unless they receive humanitarian assistance to save their life and livelihoods, these people will most probably end up in a starvation situation. And these numbers are, so it's the most severe part of food insecurity. And this is what we are looking at when we talk about food crisis. We publish together with the colleague of the World Food Programme each year a report on food crisis. And this report says that in 2019, there were 135 million people all around the world requiring urgent humanitarian assistance in order not to starve. So this is the big number that we produce and each year. Now, and if you ask me the relation with stability and things like this, that's very interesting, because we try to categorize what are the main drivers, why these people are basically almost starving. And this is consistent in all the year. About 65% of these people live in conflict-affected areas, and they live in fragile contexts. So today, the main reason for this kind of food insecurity is conflict and instability. The other two drivers is climate change and then economic instability. So the links between, the point is, unless you're able to address conflict-related issues, you will not be able to solve the major crises that these people are facing. So that is a fundamental point. The number in countries affected by crisis don't go down. Yemen, the number is 17 million. It has been 17 million for the last 3-4 years. With humanitarian assistance, you can avoid that these people starve, but you cannot bring a solution. So this is a bit to give you a sense of when we talk about numbers. Now, these numbers were before COVID, okay?
That's right.
And the point is that now there is, everyone says, okay, what is going to happen because of COVID? No, because COVID can have an impact on the food security on many, many different factors. No, on the one hand, it can bring instability. I mean, that is something clear. if the price goes up in some country, or if people lose their income, just imagine all the informal sector in the countries that we know. People are simply jobless. What is going to happen is that there will be a very high degree of instability in this country. And this is very similar, if you want, to the food crisis, the price crisis of 2008 that led to the Arab Spring. No, so exactly. There is a big exactly. So there is a worry about this. That's the first point. But then there are other things. For instance, if it's difficult to access because of the COVID-19 lockdown measure to certain areas of a given country, even humanitarian assistance cannot possibly not to be delivered in certain countries. In Yemen today, we know, it's not us, it's the World Food Program, that there are very serious difficulties in delivering humanitarian assistance. And then things which have to do more with, for instance, with the agricultural sector. If markets are curtailed because of the COVID measure, the numbers can definitely increase. So this is what is happening today. The 265 million number that you mentioned, this is an estimate that has not done by us, but has been done by our colleague from the World Food Program. Is an estimate, it's not the number. They say if everything goes wrong, in the next
that's right.
9 months, this is what can happen. So let's call it a worst case scenario.
Right. Yes, that is indeed the worst case scenario. So basically the food security situation at the moment, because of COVID, is in fact worsening.
Okay, we are now start getting data. We are setting, and because COVID behaved differently in different countries, the data that we are getting from different countries differs. So let me give you a couple of examples. Here we are really talking of real data. We are not talking of projection and things like this. For instance, in Somalia, which is one of the countries which is most food insecure, in which we had famine in 2011 and things like this, we think that number will escalate substantially for two reasons. First of all, is because the Somalia economy depends very much on remittances. Remittance of the Somali diaspora that went to Europe and to the States. With the economic crisis, the unemployment in the United States, in Europe, these remittances, which is substantial for the food security of the people living in Somalia, will most probably go down with a very serious impact on the Somalia people food security. The other point, Somalia depends to a large extent by livestock. And at the moment, if there is an export ban because of COVID, the whole Somali economy will collapse. So the point is, in Somalia, today, you can say, listen, I'm not saying that it will be a famine, but most probably around July, August, we could have a dramatic deterioration of the situation. We estimate the numbers can triple vis-a-vis of last year. In other countries which have a different kind of economy, less dependent on remittances, for the time being, yes, there will be certainly a worsening, but maybe not to the extent of Somalia. So each country, you have to see what is happening in that country, in that specific country.
So previously you mentioned the Arab Spring. Is there, yes, based on these facts, is there a possibility of such a security threat as was the Arab Spring?
Okay. What happened in 2008, one of the major mistakes that the government did at that time, it was basically to close the border and to stop export and imports. And this led to massive rise of food prices, and people, particularly in urban area, were basically revolting. I mean, that is the story. Now, today, everyone is advising government not to enter in this kind of policy measure, which were a disaster in 2008. And for the time being, no one, to my knowledge, has introduced some ban vis-a-vis of imports and exports. It might happen. My neighbor is doing this, I will do the same. So it has not yet happened, and this is very good. globally, the production is high this year. There is no major worry about a shortage of global food production, and therefore today we don't expect the rise of price that we saw in 2008. What we expect today is what I mentioned earlier on, is that a lot of the poor people in this country lives from the informal sector. And if you stop the informal sector because you cannot anymore leave your poor neighborhood and go to the city center to sell whatever you have to sell in the morning, and you don't have a national system of safety net and social protection, then I think it's easy to say that you can see some very strong instability in some of these countries. So not yet, but it's something that might happen.
So,
particularly continue.
Yes. Finally, I just, at the moment, on top of COVID-19, at the moment, there are millions of people facing famine because of a locust crisis, which seems to be continuing throughout East Africa and as well as the Arabian Peninsula.
Yes.
Now, how has that, how has the pandemic affected this situation? And how is the UN Food and Agriculture Organization assisting in this?
Okay. Okay, you see, one of the problems of the country that we are talking about is that they always have not one problem, but they have 10 problems at the same time. So that is the major issue with this country. So, and then they will have a drought, or they will have a conflict in the north and things like this. So, the locust. Locust is FAO is leading the exercise of locust control at the moment. And we were able to mobilize quite substantial resources, particularly to do the control of this infestation. No? And this is what is happening. And for instance, we are estimating that because of the control measure that we have put in place, we have been able to save substantial level of production, which we estimate at least 5 times the kind of cost of these control measures that we are putting in place. The problem, there you have 2 problems. One is that because of COVID, some of the necessary operation that we need to put in place, like importing in some cases pesticide, there is a risk that there will be some difficulties in this. That is the first point. And the second problem is that the locust, until a few months ago, it was essentially an Eastern Africa problem. So it was, if you want, confined to the 4 or 5 countries in Eastern Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia, parts of Kenya. Now, because of, this is very much due to the climatic condition, a lot of rain and wind and things like this, is moving toward the West Africa, but also towards another infestation towards the Middle East. So the larger is the infestation, the more difficult becomes its control, because also in terms of capacity, necessity of resources, and things like this. But we can say that up to now, because of the control measure, we have not seen major deterioration in terms of food insecurity. But we are really on a watchful position at the moment on this.
Let's hope that it goes as well as it could. Mr. Russo, thank you very much for your time.
Most welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good day.
We'll be in touch. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.